Could you tell me what the four living creatures and the wheels are mentioned in Ezekiel? It's talking about Ezekiel chapter 1, a chapter that seems very complex to most readers. It's a picture of the throne of God expressed in hieroglyphics. It uses the symbolism of a man, an ox, a lion. You've got four things there, and they are the same emblems as were used on the banners of the tribes of Israel. 3 tribes under one banner, 3 tribes under another, and so on. But the same 4 creatures, the man, the lion, the ox, the eagle, they were the banners of Israel. And scholars have long taught that the Gospels reflect these banners because the 4 pictures represent, among other things, the emphases of Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. Matthew pictures Christ as a king, the lion, Mark as a man, and Luke as a man, Mark as a servant, ox, and then John the eagle flying into the heavens. But in a nutshell, the symbolism is a picture of the throne of God that embodies in it mercy, intelligence, strength, all the characteristics of the 4 creatures that it mentions. It talks about wheels that are full of eyes. When wheels revolve, there's one part that doesn't move, that's the axle. And life is full of turning and changing, but one thing never moves, that's the love of God. And whatever's happening, the love of God is there. And it says the wheels are full of eyes, so that we may know God is aware of what's going on, may not think that he is asleep. Does God direct our thoughts, or are they a consequence of everything we've beheld? That is a very good question. We use our brains the same way we use a window. If there were windows here and we wanted to look at the cars out there, we wouldn't even notice the windows. We would just see what is to be seen through the windows. And you and I never stop to think of the computers on our shoulders, or very rarely. This is the most complex thing in the universe. What's between your ears is the most complex thing in the universe. And no atheist could begin to explain its marvels and its mysteries. You take a thought. At one end of a nerve, there's a throb. At the other end of the nerve come out words, ideas that may become a letter, a poem, a book, a sermon, an interchange between lovers, between friends. Now, how do we explain that? A nerve has a throb here, and out here comes intelligence. No one can explain it unless they believe in a creator. Does God direct our thoughts? If we're willing, he will help to that end to the same degree as we are willing, which means that we consciously seek to keep our mind in tune with what is right, what is good, what is pure, what is true. If we do our part, God will contribute. He will never turn us into robots. We're always free agents. Are they a consequence of everything we have beheld? To some degree. But God has priority, and the will of the believer has priority. Some thoughts come that are of the devil, and you have to repudiate them. That's very constant. C.S. Lewis said if you examine the thoughts you have in 10 minutes, any 10 minutes, you'll find there's a lot of garbage there. That's absolutely true. So the believer has to weed out what things he'll concentrate on. But we are influenced by our environment, by people, by books, by TV, by the newspapers, by everything that happens. What's important is what has priority. I hear numbers of people talk at one of God speaking to them on matters of large and small. God has a plan for every life. What does the Bible say on these matters? On number 1, the Bible does speak about the influence of the Spirit of God communicating with us. John chapters 14, 15 and 16 are full of that blessed truth that God doesn't leave us alone. The Spirit of God moves on us to tell us about himself, about duty and about truth. So it's true that God can speak to us through the Spirit. And he speaks as we read the Bible. If we read it prayerfully, if we read it carefully, if we read it with a humble, submissive heart, the Spirit will interpret the Bible to us. God has a plan for every life. God wastes nothing. He certainly doesn't waste human lives. Christ died for every sinner. If there had been one sinner, Christ would have died for that one. So every person is important. There's no such thing as chance in the Christian life. You'll never find the word chance in the New Testament except in the parable. There is no such thing as chance for the believer. God's hand is in all things, and all things work together for good. God does have a plan for every life. If we don't fit into it and we break the mould, he'll make another plan. If we don't fit into that, he'll break that mould and he'll make another one. It's best that we submit to his guidance early on. How do gospel workers keep their courage up, although often criticised and maligned? Number one, expect to be criticised and maligned. Then you won't be thrown by it. Blessed are those who expect trouble and criticism and pain and loss. They won't be disappointed. Secondly, believe that God's hand's over everything. There's a great verse in Genesis that says, "The beloved of the Lord shall dwell safely beside him, lie between his shoulders all the day long." That's a great verse. The beloved of the Lord shall dwell safely by him, between his shoulders all the day long. God is picturing where we are in relation to him all day long. So we have to believe that the lions are chained, that though we may hear the roaring, nothing will touch us except by God's permission and for our ultimate good. It doesn't mean no pain. It doesn't mean no trials. 11 of the 12 apostles were martyred. It's costly to be a Christian, but not as costly as being an unbeliever. There you lose everything. Yes, God has a plan, and if we are trusting him, even when things seem to go wrong, looking unto Jesus, we will have courage to survive. 18 times the Bible links trouble and joy. Now that's the last linkage I would make. I would think they're poles apart. But fortunately the Bible writers had a lot more sense than me. And 18 times the New Testament links trouble with joy. Read James chapter 1, read Romans chapter 5 for typical examples. 1 Peter 5:6 said we should humble ourselves. How do we do that? Well, the context helps us. The context talks about our relationship with people. Most of our pains don't come from volcanoes. They don't come from floods. Most of our pains come from people. And remember, we're sometimes the people. We cause ourselves more trouble than any other person ever causes us. In the context of the verse that's here mentioned, 1 Peter 5:6, the context before that says, "All of you clothe yourselves with humility toward one another, because God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble." Getting on with people is the biggest task in the world. It makes building the pyramids fade away into nothingness. Getting on with people. It begins in the home. That's where we're meant to learn it. The ideal home is a family with a number of children, not just a pigeon pair. Of course, today that's not easy. Children are very expensive. But God's plan was, the way it was in the Wesley household and pretty much all families until the birth control pill came along, many children. Why? Because in mixing with siblings, we learn how to get on with the world. That's why. So when the Bible says, humble yourselves, it precedes it by saying, in your relationship with one another, be humble, be Christian. In other words, you mustn't try to be first, you mustn't try to be best, you must accept the fact that you make mistakes and that you're fallible.